You remember the night Kelly Clarkson stood on that stage in 2002 and sang her heart out, and something happened that doesn't happen very often on television anymore. The whole country stopped. Not because of a competition, not because of a prize, but because a young woman from Burleson, Texas opened her mouth and made every single person watching feel like she was singing directly to them. That voice, that smile, that moment, it stayed with you, didn't it? Now, I want to tell you something. I have spent a great deal of time going back through the interviews, the court documents, the statements from people who were there, people close to Kelly during the years the cameras couldn't reach. And what I found has been sitting quietly in the shadows for a very long time. By the time we reach the end of this story together, you are going to see Kelly Clarkson not just as the star you admired, but as a woman who carried something most of us never knew she was carrying. Something that began long before the world ever learned the name Brandon Blackstock. Picture this. The year is 2020. Kelly is standing in the middle of what should have been the happiest chapter of her life. A thriving talk show, hit records, a beautiful family in Montana. And then, quietly, without any warning to the public, she files for divorce. No scandal, no shouting, no tabloid war, just a single court document. And suddenly the marriage that everyone believed was the great love story of her career was over. But here is what nobody talked about. The financial details that emerged from that divorce, the property disputes, the management fees, the allegations of what had been happening behind closed doors of their business relationship for years, painted a picture that left people who knew Kelly privately absolutely stunned. How did it come to this? How does a woman that's strong, that grounded, that clear-eyed about who she is end up in a situation like that? But to understand why that happened, we need to go back to the beginning. Go back with me to September of 2002, the finale of the very first season of American Idol. Kelly Clarkson, 20 years old, working-class Texas girl, waitress, aspiring singer, walks out onto that stage at the Kodak Theater in Hollywood wearing a simple black outfit, her hair loose around her shoulders. She sang a moment like this. And by the time she held that last note, the telephone lines were jammed. Over 15 million votes in 2 hours. A record that stood for years. The song itself went to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 faster than any single in over 30 years. What made Kelly different from the very beginning, and I think you sensed this even then, was that she never seemed to be performing a version of herself. When she laughed, it was real. When she cried, it was real. When she said thank you, she meant it. In an industry that had spent decades manufacturing personalities, here was a young woman who simply refused to be manufactured. Her debut album, Thankful, came out in April of 2003. It sold millions. But it was her second album, Breakaway, in 2004, that told you who Kelly Clarkson truly was. She co-wrote songs on that record. She pushed back against the label. She insisted on making music that meant something to her, not just something that would sell. Since You've Been Gone, Behind These Hazel Eyes, Breakaway itself, those weren't just pop songs. Those were declarations. And the audience, particularly women who had ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated, heard every word. She was, in those years, one of the most genuinely beloved figures in popular music. Not because of scandal, not because of spectacle, but because she felt like one of us. But here is what was happening behind that image that the public never fully understood. The music industry in the early 2000s was not a kind place for a young woman trying to maintain creative control. Kelly's relationship with her record label, RCA, was difficult almost from the start. When she brought them the songs she wanted to record for her third album, My December, in 2007, the label pushed back hard. They wanted more of what had worked before. Safer material, more radio-friendly, more commercially predictable. Kelly refused. Clive Davis, the legendary record executive who had shaped the careers of Whitney Houston, Bruce Springsteen, and Alicia Keys, reportedly felt strongly that Kelly was making a mistake. According to people familiar with those conversations, the disagreement became deeply personal. There were reports that Davis told interviewers and industry insiders that he had tried to talk Kelly out of releasing the album. Kelly, for her part, did not stay quiet. She spoke publicly about the conflict, which in those days was a remarkable thing for a young female artist to do. She told interviewers that she felt she was being controlled, that her instincts as an artist were being dismissed. She used her own name and her own voice to push back against one of the most powerful men in the music business. My December was released despite the opposition. It was a deeply personal record. Raw, more introspective than anything she had done before. The label gave it limited promotional support. The sales were lower than her previous albums. And for a time, there were genuine questions about whether Kelly's career would survive her own act of independence. This was the first time Kelly Clarkson showed the world that she would choose integrity over comfort. It would not be the last. Now we come to the chapter that I believe most people have never fully understood, the story of Brandon Blackstock. Kelly met Brandon Blackstock in 2006, though they did not begin their romantic relationship until years later. Brandon was the son of Narvel Blackstock, who was at that time the manager of Reba McEntire, one of the most powerful figures in country music management. Brandon himself worked in the music industry, eventually becoming a talent manager. They reconnected around 2012. They became engaged in December of that year. They married in October of 2013 on a farm in Tennessee. The wedding photographs showed a woman radiant with happiness, the kind of happiness that looks, from the outside, like an arrival. Like everything has finally come together. And for a time, it seemed to be true. Kelly spoke about Brandon with unmistakable warmth in interview after interview. They had 2 children together, River Rose, born in June 2014, and Remington, born in April 2016. Kelly spoke openly about how much she loved being a mother, how her family had given her an anchor she had never felt before. But here, and I want you to listen carefully here, is what was happening that the cameras never showed. Brandon Blackstock had become Kelly's manager. The man she was married to was also the man controlling the business side of her career. And according to the legal documents that became public during their divorce proceedings, which Kelly filed in June of 2020, what unfolded over those years was deeply troubling. The divorce proceedings in Los Angeles revealed allegations that Blackstock had collected management commissions from Kelly's earnings, commissions that her legal team later argued were improper. There were claims that Starstruck Management Group, which Blackstock was associated with, had operated without a valid talent agency license in California, which under state law raised serious questions about the legality of the fees that had been collected. And in just a moment, I'm going to tell you the one detail that changes the way you see this entire story. Because the detail is not about money. The detail is about what Kelly said, quietly, in interviews given years after the divorce was finalized, about how long she had known something was wrong, and how long she had stayed silent about it. According to people close to Kelly during those years, she had become aware of concerns about the management situation well before she filed for divorce. But she was also, simultaneously, a wife. A vintage celebrity channel, Kelly Clarkson voiceover script, Page 5 mother. A woman who had built her public identity around the idea of loyalty and love and making things work. She stayed. She tried. And according to those who knew her best, the emotional cost of staying, of holding together a private reality that did not match the public image, was immense. What I want to tell you now is the part of Kelly's story that I think matters most. The part that has nothing to do with courtrooms or contracts. People who have worked with Kelly Clarkson over the years, musicians, producers, crew members from her touring years, speak about her in a way that is remarkably consistent. They talk about a woman who remembered names, who asked about your family, who showed up early and stayed late and never, in all the years of fame and pressure and industry battles, developed the kind of coldness that success so often brings. There is a story told by more than one person who was present about Kelly during the touring years of Breakaway. After a show, in a city I won't name specifically, a young woman came backstage. She was not press. She was not industry. She was a fan who had somehow gotten through, and she was crying, not out of excitement, but out of something heavier, something personal. By all accounts, Kelly sat with her. Not for a photograph. Not for a moment. For a real conversation. She was late to the bus. Her team was waiting. She stayed anyway. That is not the story of a manufactured celebrity. That is the story of a person. And when the divorce became public, when the legal filings began to reveal the financial complications, the management disputes, the slow unraveling of something that had been presented to the world as solid and whole, the people who knew Kelly best were not surprised that she had held on as long as she had. They were surprised, one person close to her said, that she had carried it so quietly for so long. Because Kelly Clarkson, for all her openness, had learned early, in a childhood that was not easy, raised by a single mother after her parents divorced when she was 6 years old, that you do not show the wound until you are sure it has healed. The divorce from Brandon Blackstock was finalized in November of 2022, more than 2 years after Kelly had filed. 2 years of legal proceedings, of financial disputes, of co-parenting negotiations, of a public silence on her part that was, given what was being alleged, remarkable in its dignity. She did not give angry interviews. She did not use her platform to settle scores. She moved her children and her life from their Montana ranch, which itself became a point of legal dispute, with Brandon seeking to remain on the property, back to Los Angeles, and then eventually to New York, where her talk show relocated. The starstruck management situation resulted in a legal ruling that found the company had violated California's Talent Agencies Act. The arbitration decision awarded Kelly a significant sum. Figures reported at the time suggested it ran into the millions. For many observers, it was a vindication of what her legal team had argued from the beginning. But what happened to the people who had been part of that chapter of her life? Brandon Blackstock and Reba McEntire, who had been together for over 20 years and had married in 2011, divorced in 2015, before Kelly's own marriage ended. Brandon Blackstock, by the time the legal proceedings concluded, had largely retreated from the public eye. And Kelly? Kelly Clarkson launched The Kelly Clarkson Show in 2019, a program that became, almost immediately, one of the most warmly received daytime programs in years. Not because of controversy, not because of manufactured drama, but because audiences recognized in the woman sitting behind that desk someone who had been through something real and had come out the other side still laughing, still kind, still herself. Here is what I want to leave you with. Kelly Clarkson came into our lives at the beginning of this century as a voice. Pure, unadorned, genuinely extraordinary. And for more than 2 decades since that September night in 2002, she has done something that very few people in her position managed to do. She has remained, through all of it, the label battles, the public disputes, the marriage that became a legal proceeding, recognizably herself. Vintage Celebrity Channel, Kelly Clarkson voiceover script. Page 7. The contradiction at the heart of her story is this. The woman who sang so powerfully about independence and self-worth spent years in a professional and personal arrangement that, by the evidence that eventually became public, was not serving her well. She knew on some level, and she stayed not out of weakness, but out of the same fierce loyalty that made her beloved in the first place. That is not a failure. That is a human being. That is what it looks like when someone who loves deeply also has enough grace not to burn everything down when the love stops working. The audience that fell in love with Kelly Clarkson in 2002 loved her because she was real. What we have learned in the years since only confirms what you already sensed. The realness was never an act. It was all she had, and it was always enough. Now, I want to ask you something personal. Do you remember where you were the first time you heard Kelly sing? Whether it was that Idol finale, or a song on the radio that caught you off guard one afternoon, or a record your daughter or granddaughter played in the car. I would love to hear that memory. Tell me about it in the comments below. And if stories like this one, stories that go behind the headlines and into the real lives of the people we admired, mean something to you, then this channel was made for you. Subscribe and stay with us, because this channel is for people who remember when stars were truly larger than life.